sole source for live meetings. The Government Channel presents
Welcome to Straightforward Conversation with Gary Hunter. My guest today is Tom Stork, a teacher at Athens High School and an Education and World Wide Web site coordinator for the Southeastern Ohio Regional Freenet. Tom teaches physics, ecology, anatomy, physiology, and advanced computer science at Athens High School. He teaches the use of Windows environment for educators in West Virginia, and in addition works with the Governor's Scholars Program at Ohio University during the summers. His honors are almost too numerous to mention. However, I do want to mention that Tom was a charter inductee of the Ohio University Governor's Scholars Hall of Fame, a 1994 inductee of the Jennings Scholar as a physics teacher, and a 1996 inductee into the Ohio University Gifted Education Hall of Fame. Good evening, Tom.
Hi, Gary.
Tonight we're going to be talking about the Southeastern Ohio Regional Freenet. And that's kind of a mouthful. Tom, what is the Southeastern Ohio Regional Freenet?
Well, it's a mouthful to tell you, too. Southeastern Ohio Regional Freenet, we hope, is becoming known to most people around here as SURF. And we chose that acronym so that it could be pronounced that way so that we could bring access to people throughout our rural community here, extending over several counties, to the internet. And people then could surf the net, so to speak.
How long has the Southeastern Ohio Regional Freenet, or SURF, been in existence?
Officially, I guess it's been in existence about 2.5 years, but unofficially, it's been ramping up for about 3.5 years, and we've been taking members from the community at large as well as members of the educational community for just 2 years now.
Our audience may not be real knowledgeable about what the term internet means. Can you just briefly tell me in a few words,
Sure.
What is the internet?
Back in the 1960s, there was recognized a need to have in the United States some sort of a computer network among defense installations that would be invulnerable to attack by nuclear missiles. And so they established
Cold War.
That's right, that's right. They established a sort of a communications network which had no head to it, but rather a whole bunch of nodes that each independently could communicate with each other, and that messages and other stuff could be routed among all these different nodes, even if one or more of them were taken out. And because so much of the work for defense at that time to support the Cold War effort was done at research universities, and more communications by research scientists were being transmitted over computers, it began to evolve into a network of communication among the educational community. And although nobody foresaw at that time the sort of thing that it would become and has become in the last about 1.5 years, the seeds were sown then. Now the internet comprises all computers that communicate with each other over this nationwide and now worldwide backbone of telephone lines by a means called TCP/IP, which is transfer protocol and internet protocol way of sending little packets of information about. It's each one has a little part of your message in it, and one part might go by way of Anchorage, another part might go by way of Wheeling, but they all come and reassemble together in a remote computer, and it has meaning that way. So this way of independently sending out those messages is actually what makes a computer a part of the internet.
But I have a computer, for instance, at my home that cannot directly connect to quote what you described as the internet. It has to go through some intermediate step through the university computer or something to connect?
It all depends. Within about the last year, a kind of connection to the internet through what are called local internet service providers, such as in our community EurekaNet and FrogNet. Previous to that, well, Surf Surf is an internet service provider, but not in the same sense as letting your computer be a real part of the internet. In that case, when you directly connect to Surf, you connect as a terminal on a computer that's connected to the internet. When you connect through one of those other services, you connect as a computer on the internet. So yes, your computer could be part of that, but the information that's available to you would be equally available if you use the lowly service of Surf.
And once I get into the internet, how do I find what I'm interested in?
Now that's a good question. There is an increasing amount of information out there, some of it easily searchable, and other information that is harder to find. In fact, the skills to discover that information are one of the aims of us as educators, to try to provide to the students as they learn about different ways to find out information. Currently, the most frequently accessed means of getting at information on the internet is through something called the Wide World Web. And the Wide World Web links computers and information on those computers through what are called hypertext documents. And if you've ever used the help service on your Windows computer or on your Apple computer, and you see certain words that are highlighted that you can click on, and then it brings you up more information about that, that's hypertext. Hypertext allows for a brief outline of information that has a meaningful context to be given to you, and yet you can find out more information by having certain words that link to others. The World Wide Web links to documents that are scattered and disseminated all over the world and yet are brought together in a coherent way in a single thing called a web page. That's the most popular thing, but it's not the oldest. Still, much information out there is available by means of another technique called the Gopher. And the Gopher is more menu-driven. It's certainly text-based as opposed to having the graphical input and stuff like that. But lots of information, once again, is available by looking at the menu and making choices and clicking on those and going on from there.
Is it fair to say that if you're using the Gopher method that, while it might be more technical, you can zero in on information more specifically than using the other technique? It seems to me there's so much information out there, it's almost information overload when you, unless you really are careful what search words you use, you're going to come up with not literally thousands, but hundreds of thousands of potential documents.
Searching is something that you got to do in either case, and there are search engines that make it possible for you to find, as you say, almost more than you could ever digest. Whether I would choose or think of the Gopher set of ways to get to things as being easier to understand than the other, I'm not certain.
I didn't necessarily mean easier to understand. I meant maybe more specific in the search. It may actually be more difficult to understand a Gopher.
Boy. You know, as I think about it, the issue comes down to the way in which the people who are the information providers organize what information they make available. That's the major responsibility that people, for instance, who run the special interest groups on Surf and so forth have, is to think about how their users are going to find that and be able to separate the information from the data. I mean, there's lots and lots of data, and it can be meaningless unless it has a context that's important to you, and also has a context in which you can judge whether it's valid or not. The other part of it is helping users themselves, and particularly students in high school and so forth now who are learning about this, to be able to themselves make choices about the method by which they do a search. If once upon a time you'd come up with 10 matches for a search on Little Women, now you get 500,000. And being able to narrow that search by including further characterizing phrases like Louisa May Alcott or something like that that would help you narrow what you wanted, or critical references, and you know, both being a wise information chooser and a wise information searcher is
something
underlies what the education about the web is, I guess.
Well, it's very interesting, Tom, and we'll continue this conversation after this commercial break. Welcome back to Straightforward Conversation. My guest this evening is Tom Stork, Worldwide Web Site Coordinator for the Southeastern Ohio Regional Freenet, or SURF. And I get tongue-tied a little bit saying that Worldwide Web. Tom, I'd like to shift gears maybe a little bit now for you and talk about generally for our audience some of the services that we might expect to see on the internet or made available through SURF even. Email, etc., that is out there that people might be using.
Sure. We spoke earlier about internet service providers, and SURF was established chiefly because there wasn't such a thing for folks around here, and it's been our aim to be able to try to provide people of low or limited income, primitive equipment, the same access to the wealth of information that's on the internet that they can use in thinking about education and training for themselves, be able to communicate with loved ones who are far away, and so forth. Probably the one thing that is the most frequently used service that any internet service provider offers is the idea of electronic mail. And I know that there's even been talk among the United States government that they would like to probably include some way to have electronic mail be a service that might be through the post office. Email is easy.
Charge for it again.
Well, they might charge everybody. You know, nothing's for free. Everybody's got to pay someplace, right? And you know, it either comes out of your money, out of your pocket in taxes, or it comes out of your pocket for regular services. And there's a debate about the balance between those things. Certainly, there are always going to be gaps, as in our region, where services just don't come from the open market, and in other agencies, volunteer agencies like SURF and the support of the Ohio University and so forth, and federal government grants have stepped in to try to see that some of those services are available to people around here. Email makes it easy to be able to send almost instantaneously messages to people anywhere in the world, and sometimes for better or for worse, to lots of people all around the world. You may have heard of spamming, where people will be sent messages that they don't want, and not just that one person, but hundreds of thousands of them, so that it clogs up this wonderful pipeline that we've got to transfer information.
There's currently no way to screen out email messages from coming into your computer if you're connected to receive them, right? There are in fact tools that will allow you through the email program that you've got to simply delete all the messages that come from a particular address. But there are increasingly sophisticated means to get those to you too. I found the easiest thing is to hit the D for delete key when I see a header from a message that I've got no interest in, and it doesn't take much to do that. You don't have to be bothered. That leads me into another thing that seems to be more increasingly used on the internet, and that is advertising. What's going on in that area right now? I see that things are coming over either by email messages or other means.
Right. I know that, and as you read the Wall Street Journal or even the Athens papers about what's happening economically, one of the big areas is technology, and the notion that in fact the internet might be a way in which people can trade their goods and services worldwide. One of the drawbacks is, of course, then that intrudes the notion of commerce into what was otherwise an unsullied area, but there are no free lunches. And in fact, economic development is the bread and butter of every part of the United States, including southeastern Ohio. We at SURF have been lucky in attracting some grant money to, in fact, begin a business incubator project in which we would work with small businesses around here to do a couple things. One, through cooperation with ACENet, which is the Appalachian Center for Economic Networking, SURF is looking to provide support for businesses who might first want to be able to communicate with other small businesses like themselves to share information and resources that they've got, but also to provide a means in which they could begin to establish a presence on the internet and seek, well, for instance, the relish and sauces, kind of the Frog Ranch, I can't remember, salsa outfit. Well, people in southeastern Ohio certainly eat salsa, but they can't eat enough in order to keep a factory in place. And yet, people all over the world might be interested in this. How can they, on a limited advertising budget, make their presence known and let other people know about their product Internet is ideal for this sort of thing. And so we've been trying to explore with them and with other industries around here ways in which they can, on a small scale, begin to get out and then gain their feet, so to speak, in this sea of Internet commerce.
Before we go for another break here in the conversation, I'd like you to just briefly touch upon some of the things that might be out there in the future, and I just direct your attention to maybe some things like interactive conferencing that we hear about, music and video on demand. Are those things going to be available on the internet?
If we listen to the folks from Redmond, Washington, the West Coast, they certainly
Obviously
will.
I do.
Right now, we have new conferencing software that we put together on Surf that will make it possible. In fact, I've established for my physics, anatomy, and physiology classes conferences where the students can then log in and put in questions that they've got about the curriculum, share projects that they've got, find out assignments and dates of tests and so forth. It's just beginning to get started because the wiring for making access in the schools to all the students is just going in. But this is something that I see, I would not have predicted as recently as 2 years ago the increase in the quality of information that is now available. For instance, in physics right now we're studying about the history of astronomy and the way in which there was a time in which people had to make a choice between whether there was an Earth-centered or a Sun-centered universe, and various great astronomers from the Alexandrian and post-Alexandrian age like Ptolemy put together these Earth-centered systems with wonderful, beautiful kinds of geometric configurations that had nothing to do with the way things really were. It's hard to make students understand what those look like, and schools like ours don't have facsimile copies of the Almagest, which was his book. I did a quick search on the internet. I was able to bring up facsimile pages, print those out, and share them with the students in class all within about 15 minutes, and that's the sort of thing that
It's going to be
darned exciting to me. So.
very interesting, Tom. Tom and I will continue this conversation after this commercial break. Welcome back to Straightforward Conversation. My guest this evening is Tom Stork. Tom, let's continue the discussion a little bit and change veins maybe a little bit again and talk about what's new and exciting in the area of schools that you were mentioning that's going on.
Well, you heard that I got a little excited there. As a teacher, the prospect that telecommunications holds for what happens in the schools is, to me, just startling and amazing. I really do see this opportunity for students to be able to work with other students and experts far away and to carry on projects that they share information that has real value beyond whether they take a test on it or not, to be something that probably is going to transform education in ways we hadn't thought about.
Students, I assume, get excited about this too when they come in.
In fact, this is how Southeastern Ohio Regional Freenet started getting going. A friend of mine, Damian Bond, and I began to work to get students in our separate schools. At that time, he was teaching in an inner city school in Cincinnati, and I had students here in Athens, and we began a project whereby those students could begin to communicate. We got help from our friends in the computer science department here at Ohio University, and we began to establish a little link. It was amazing the way in which those students took to it, began to apply themselves in all sorts of ways that we hadn't anticipated, look for ways to share cultural differences that they certainly had no sense of before, and really began to carry forward a project in which they were learning all sorts of things that just went well beyond the curriculum. Governor Voinovich has, and the legislature has decided, and wisely, that they need to support such an opportunity for students. The SchoolNet is going to wire up all the buildings, and then the buildings themselves are going to be put upon the resources of the community to find a way themselves to link to the internet and to each other. But the beginning of the infrastructure is going in, and there are a number of prototype projects across the state that are going to let other schools see how this tool might be used. There's going to be time for training of teachers, and while none of it will happen as fast as it oughta, it's all coming to pass now. Hopefully by the end of this month, our schools in the Athens City school system will all be completely wired, and by the end of this calendar year, it's my hope that will be connected up with each other and have an intranet within the city district, and also each building, throughout the building, will be linked to the intranet through our local internet service provider, CIOVAC.
I noticed you said use the term schools in the Athens City school system. That brings up an interesting issue of how young is too young to begin to learn to use the internet. Where should we be starting to put these, in grade schools?
Well,
schools?
we certainly are. In fact, the thrust of the SchoolNet Plus program is to see that it's in the classrooms of the K through 4 students, where the first support from the state to buy the computers to hook up to the internet are going to be. So yes, that's where it begins. I mean, and I believe the sense is that then it's going to be demand driven from the bottom and push its way to the top. Being a high school educator, that's not necessarily what I want to wait for, but nonetheless, I think it's probably a wise path.
You think, are computers available right now at the Athens High School for attaching to the internet?
We've got 5 access points, and those are all through dial-up modems. Soon, all of those places, plus I guess about 75 or so other computers in labs and classrooms, because of SchoolNet, will then have access to the internet directly. And it'll make a big difference in the ease and speed and breadth of student access to the internet.
What are universities doing in this area? I noticed that in seeking some information on Ohio University, because my son's a senior this year out of Athens, that they have an excess of 1,200 computers there. Is this common among the universities, as far as you know?
I know that more and more of my students are able to find out about the universities that they'd like to attend by going to their websites on the internet. They can get online information about application admissions, and they can find out about programs, and almost in every case, they talk about the access the students will have at that time to be able to get to the internet. I know a number of my students go out and right away they email me back. So yeah, it's out there.
It's out there.
And also the neat thing is that it's a way in which the pre-college classes and college institutions like Ohio University can work together to train, for instance, pre-service teachers. They can be working in classrooms and communicate back with the college and so forth about what's going on. The Learning Community Link project that we have as a prototype links Ohio University and Ironton and Portsmouth and Columbus inner city schools all together in a way in which our students are going to be participating together in a learning adventure and also an investigation of the environment and the history of their communities and so forth.
Well, Tom, this really sounds exciting and interesting. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to summarize a burning question of mine, and that: where does all this technology leave those who are over 40 and computer illiterate?
Well, I'm over 40.
But you're not computer illiterate. It was a two-part question.
And my parents are over 70. And my parents are, you know, I got a computer for them, and with very little of my instruction and most of their own initiative through elder hostels and so forth, have begun sending email and searching the Wild World Web and all that kind of stuff. I know that a number of our surfers are not spring chickens, but rather older members of the community. I see it as a great opportunity with a little terror, but mostly a lot of joy for people of all ages to begin to correspond across the generations. Certainly involvement in the city programs. We've got the city ordinances online now through your efforts and through the mayor's efforts to get other sorts of information about city government. People can begin to participate in their government and be participants in our democracy, as I think the whole aim of a society like ours ought to be.
I agree, Tom, too. And I, too, have a parent that's over 70 that is very interested in using computers and getting into it. So I think it's something that people are going to do. Very interesting conversation. Thank you. This has been Straightforward Conversation with Gary Hunter, and good evening.